The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Why Philosophy Can't Find God. Hey everybody, last month I did a video on why science can't find God. And of course, I got a lot of really cool replies. There's people who just read the question or the title and didn't bother to dig any further. And they're like, oh, science can't find God because God doesn't exist. And ha ha ha. And that's all amusing. But there was a comment that came in that tried to answer in a different way why science can't find God from the perspective of someone who actually believes that there is a God. And I'm not going to promise that I'm going to be able to go through and answer every comment that comes in. That's just impossible. I gave up on that years and years and years ago. But if you do comment below, know that I am reading some of them. I don't read everything. I'm not going to be caught up by trolls. But if there's a post there that looks like it actually addresses the topic, I do try to read all of them. If it is fairly simple to reply to, I'll just put a comment reply. Some of them may deserve a video response like this one. I can't guarantee that. And some of them may deserve a response that is, hey, let's discuss this in email, or call into one of the many shows that I do and we can discuss it there. Because I'm, despite what some people think, I am genuinely looking for better and better interlocutors to present their case. And so today what we have is this comment that was left on the Why Science Can't Find God. I've blocked out the name. I have no idea who this individual is. I don't know if we've interacted before. I don't know if they're a caller. Hell, I don't even know if they're serious, because a lot of this can be parodied now. But the answer, according to this person, to why science can't find God is that I've committed a category error. The question of whether God exists is not a scientific question. In the first place, it's a philosophical question, metaphysics particularly. Regarding and then there's others. We'll get into the other stuff there. So he starts off by saying that what I've done is essentially committed a category error. And a category error is when you talk about something in one category when it belongs in another. For example, there's a difference between something that is a concept and something that is concrete. And so if you have something that is purely conceptual or an abstraction like 3, and you try to assess it as if it were something concrete like apple, that's a category error. You are taking the thing that we're discussing, 3, and putting it in the wrong category. But philosophy exists for concepts, not concretes. So if you're going to say that this isn't a scientific question because it's not a concrete, it's a philosophical question because it's a concept, I think you've missed the point on potentially what God we're talking about. The God that I'm talking about is the one that many people believe in, or one of the many ones that people believe in, is one that actually is believed to manifest in reality in concrete, detectable ways. God in that concept, in that context, is not merely a concept. The notion that this isn't a scientific question is patently absurd if we're talking about a God that manifests in reality in detectable, concrete ways. God answers prayer. God does this. You can see his handiwork in the stars and the trees or anything else. These are the sorts of claims that people are making about a God. Now, philosophy can, does, and should guide the conceptual value of our methods, but the concretes are merely descriptive facts. They don't have any prescriptive value. The fact-value distinction you can't get from an is to an odd or an odd to an is. We'll skip that because I've discussed it many, many times. But the commenter here is asserting that whether God exists or not is not a scientific question. It's a philosophical question, and specifically a metaphysics question. The problem here is that, first, metaphysics is inferior to modern natural science as a path to knowledge about the empirical world, about the facts of the empirical world. The questions that science addresses used to be a part of metaphysics, the part that actually addresses what exists, while metaphysics tends to focus more on why it exists, or what does it mean to exist, or what does it mean given that it exists, what can we say about it, how should we describe it. That's where the meta thing, metaphysics, it's about this rather than is this. And science deals with the concretes, philosophy is dealing with the abstract concepts and generalities. Science is basically the part of metaphysics that says, hey, we need to define what things are for it to be useful in any other context. Since that's what's directly observable and detectable, you can worry about why it is if you want, or if it is, and speculative assessments that aren't testable or falsifiable. But we're going to focus on the testable, falsifiable assessment of concrete facts in the universe. Now, he then goes on to address a claim that I don't recall making, or I don't think this is actually an accurate phrasing of what I said, or certainly not of what I meant. But he says, regarding the claim, we haven't provided a way of knowing anything beyond the limitations of the scientific method, logic. We can use logic to know some things beyond the limitations of the scientific method with more certainty than any current scientific consensus, given absolute truth exists in logic, but not in science. Now, I don't believe that's an accurate phrasing of what I said. However, logic only gets to knowledge when the argument presented is sound. And soundness is contingent on the truth of the premises. Hold that thought. I know somebody's wait. No, Matt, you've said before. Hold that thought. And science provides the confirmation of that truth for the empirical claims. The claim that God exists and manifests and interacts with reality is an empirical claim. Now, when I say that the soundness is contingent upon the truth, I know we've gone over this before. In an argument is valid if true premises would lead to a true conclusion. That's about the structure. And then it's sound if, in fact, the premises are true. But what we're saying there is, if you believe the premises are true, that's all that matters. Because if the argument's valid in structure and you believe the A and B and deny C, you are being illogical. We could also argue irrational, but in any case, you're in violation of the principles of logic. Whether or not the premises are actually true is a metaphysical type of question about whether or not we have access to truth and what truth is. Is truth just that which comports with reality? But if what comports with reality is contingent upon our senses and our ability to detect it, do you actually have access to truth at all? This is why science, as this person points out, does not make claims of truth. Instead, science says, here is the best model that is most consistent with all the evidence presented. Boom. We're not saying it's absolutely true. We're willing to revise it based on new information. Science consistently provides the most consistently reliable, accurate models of reality. Period. You can call it scientism all day. It's not quite what I'm saying, but that's why we use it. And that's why science modern natural science is not really a part of metaphysics, even though that's where it began. If the commenter is advocating for a deistic God, a God that isn't empirically testable, well, that God's existence is indistinguishable from our perspective from its non-existence. And therefore, anyone who accepts the existence of a deistic God has a claim that cannot be warranted. Well, hang on, Matt. If you say it cannot be warranted, isn't that scientism? Because all you're really saying is that there's nothing for science to test. And I'm saying, no, it's not just scientism. If you believe in a God that does not manifest in any detectable way, what is your justification for believing that God actually exists? You are then claiming to have detected that which is not detectable, and that's a problem. So if he's advocating for a deistic God, he may have a stronger claim, but we know with high confidence that he's absolutely not talking about a deistic God. He then goes on to say, we can use logic to know some things beyond the limitations of the scientific method with more certainty than any current scientific consensus, given absolute truth exists in logic, but never in science. No, that's not remotely right. The absolute truth, of course, is not what science produces, but it doesn't produce it because it isn't producible. Logic doesn't magically produce truth. It's not like science is giving a best guess and logic is giving absolute truth. The soundness, the reliability, the soundness of an argument is contingent upon it being true or accepted as true, and the truth may not be accessible. But to the extent that something is reasonably acceptable as the truth, scientific methods produce the most accurate, most reliable models. Metaphysics does not. He continues by saying this is tough. all rational argumentation within philosophy and metaphysics, informed by existing scientific claims and laws of physics, clearly points to the existence of God, literally all of it, and even capitalizes all. And my answer is no, that's not the case. And that's the end of where anyone should take this commenter seriously. First of all, it's ridiculous to make these sort of all claims, and it's worse when you add literally to it. Now, I know the modern dictionary will define one of the usages of literally as figuratively, because people have misused literally so much that they mean it figuratively. So now even the dictionary, because dictionaries describe usage, they are not prescriptive, they are descriptive. And so they're describing the fact that there's a bunch of humans out there who say literally when they actually mean figuratively. Okay, cool. But when you put that in there, it's a little extra kind of a dig. But he also tries to cheat there and says metaphysics informed by science. But that's not metaphysics. It's not metaphysics supplying the truth part. When you say metaphysics informed by science, that means you're taking scientific findings, which is what I'm advocating, and then you are engaging in metaphysical assessments of them for the why and the how and all that other stuff, or expanding upon those. But if you have a logical argument whose premises are the findings of science, you're not doing metaphysics. All you're doing is here's a logical argument whose premises are scientific. That's not metaphysics providing any truth or substance. That's raw logic, and science is providing the substance. After that, it's not metaphysics. It's just a logical argument with scientifically supported substances. And it doesn't lead to God at all. I mean, there are plenty of attempts at logically valid and sound arguments. I'm not convinced that the ones that are valid are in fact sound. And quite often, they're not in any way rooted to a scientific finding, which still isn't true, but would at least be a scientifically reliable, acceptable proposition. Now, he concludes this with a jab. The only way anyone can even attempt to deny this is if, one, they're held back by scientism causing them to falsely think philosophy is just opinions. I'm really, really close to saying that comment is at least partially true about me. I'm certainly closer to scientism than I am to any real appreciation for the supposed findings or speculative things about metaphysics, because metaphysics, talking about the how and the why, it's not testable, it's not falsifiable, it's not just merely opinion. It is logical reasoning, but it is based on problematic foundations. It's why there are hard sciences and soft sciences, and it's why philosophy is often considered navel-gazing. I don't view philosophy in that sense. So he may be right that I'm being held back by scientism, although I don't think that's completely the case, because when he was arguing for how metaphysics, all of it points to God, he was specifically saying metaphysics informed by existing scientific claims, because he knows metaphysics on its own doesn't get you anywhere. It's a speculative endeavor that is our best guess at things that aren't testable or aren't falsifiable, that aren't about concretes in reality, but are instead about abstractions or meta-level assessments. The second option is that they're completely logically incompetent. I don't think that's the case, or I don't think I'm completely logically incompetent. Maybe partially logically incompetent, but here I think between the two of us, I know who has a better understanding of this. And the third option is that they're unaware of the 100 plus logically valid and sound arguments for God. What a nice round number, 100 plus. Couldn't have been 90 plus, couldn't have been 50 plus, 12 plus, 3 plus, 1,000 plus. Yeah, that's, that one's true, because I'm not aware of any arguments for the existence of God that are both valid and sound. If one existed and I was aware of it, I would be a believer in the God, because I am willing to accept a demonstrably valid and sound argument. But he sets up those three propositions. Either you're engaged in scientism, or you just don't understand logic, or you're just unaware of the arguments for the existence of God that are valid and sound. Well, you're right. I probably lean towards scientism, although that wasn't my argument in this case. And of the two of us, you're the one who had to prop your metaphysics up with an appeal to science as a foundation for it. I don't think I'm logically incompetent, but you make up your own mind about that. And you're right, though. I'm not aware of any valid or sound arguments. But the commenter is wrong about the category error. If God's existence is not a scientific question, then God does not manifest in reality in any detectable way. Because if it's detectable, it's a scientific question. Period. Done. Doesn't matter whether or not we're actually able to assess it now, whether we don't have the tools to assess it, whether we may never be able to access it, it is still a scientific question. Or the caller's talking about a different God, one that's conceptual and doesn't exist in any identifiable way. But that God is an example of detecting the undetectable and isn't propped up by valid and sound arguments. Or the commenter is logically incompetent, and or the caller the commenter should have presented one of the 100 plus valid and sound arguments they're aware of, but failed to do that and just left a confused and muddled response. See, it would have been really easy to say, as a reply to my video of why science can't find God, to say, I understand what you're saying, Matt, but metaphysics, using the principles or the findings of science, can find God. And then you could present one of the 100 plus logically valid and sound arguments that you're aware of for that. But you didn't do that. Instead, you just accuse me of a category error when there isn't one, suggested that I made a claim that I didn't quite make, but that we can know things beyond what science can teach us by using logic. Yes, fan of logic, teach it, study it, boom. But that's not a limitation of science, because science is rooted in logical argument. He then went on to, we can know things with greater certainty than we can with science because logic has certainty and science doesn't. No, you can assert that all day long, but now you need to go get your Nobel Prize for demonstrating that certainty and truth are viable propositions, because I don't think that human beings can have absolute certainty at all. And whatever the absolute truth is, to whatever extent we may have access to it, it may be absolutely true that I am the only person who's ever uttered the sentence, blah, 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 this is blah, and that's blah, and there's purple people eaters under the planet doing things that are crazy. I may be the only person, it may be absolutely true, I might be the only person who's ever uttered that sentence up to this point, and yet I would have no way of knowing that, no way of demonstrating it, no way of proving it. It is not a testable, falsifiable production at all. And then claims that all of metaphysics points to God, which demonstrates this person's bias. This is another God lover who just thinks that God's presence is identifiable and detectable everywhere. Look at the trees, look at the world, everything, all of this how and why and what's morality and ethics and aesthetics and all of this, all of it comes from God, therefore all of it must point to God. But that only is true in your head when you begin with, it all comes from God, therefore it all points to God. If God is the explanation for everything, then everything, while we're evaluating for why it exists, must point back to God, because God is the reason that it exists. This is the bias of beginning with the conclusion you're trying to prove and running off with it. And then they end with basically well, I think Matt's either, into scientism, logically incompetent, or unaware of the arguments for the God that exist that are valid and sound. Well, why didn't you print them? Why didn't you present a single one of those 100 valid and sound arguments? Why is it that For 17 plus years, I've been hosting call-in shows, waiting for someone to present a valid and sound argument for the existence of God, debating it in front of thousands, in videos in front of millions, and still not one identifiable sound argument for the existence of God. Now, I'm too logically incompetent to figure out which of us is right, or which of those explanations explains why I think the commenter is wrong. Is he wrong because he's talking about a different God? Is he wrong because the commenter is logically incompetent? Or does he have a sound argument that he just failed to present? I don't know. Maybe I am too logically incompetent to figure out which of those or some other option explains their confusion. But there it is, almost packaged with a bow. Another comment. That's my best take on it. Maybe I'm just too clueless to understand the depth of the metaphysics that points to an absolute truth and the existence of a God with more confidence than any scientific finding ever. But I'll stick with the scientific findings like curing illness. That's a pretty good confidence levels. And we can actually measure those confidence levels. Yeah, you can whine all day about how Matt's not impressed by metaphysics, and it won't change a thing. It won't change whether or not I'm impressed by it. It won't change whether or not anybody should be. And it won't change that most of what this commenter said is just, I love God so much, I just want to say that Matt's wrong. See you next time.